I just want to apologize to Mike's mom and Josh's mom and my mom. And I'm sorry to everyone. I was very naive. I am so sorry for everything that has happened. Because in spite of what Mike says now, it is my fault. Because it was my project. And I insisted. I insisted on everything. I insisted that we weren't lost. I insisted that we keep going. I insisted that we walk south. Everything had to be my way. And this is where we've ended up. And it's all because of me that we're here now. Hungry and cold and hunted. I love you, Mom and Dad. I'm so sorry. I'm scared to close my eyes. I'm scared to open them.
And we're back with another episode of the Frostburg Film Society podcast. Sadly, this is the last film for Maryland Movie Month, but in terms of cultural impact and relevance, it's hard to argue that the Blair Witch Project isn't the largest cinematic franchise out of Maryland. You know, this is one of those films I distinctly remember it coming out, and I distinctly remember going to see it. What was I, 12 or something, 11? And this is one that has stuck with me for decades now, and I still think about it often, and everything about it almost seems impossible. It proliferated and elevated the found footage genre for horror. And a lot of people like to say it created it, which is far, far from true. Kind of what this is, there is a documentary element. Documentaries as a genre, most people think of them as like educational, factual, and some of that is true, but a lot of it is fictionalized to elevate the project itself, right? I mean, this is something that this reaches back to some of the very earliest documentaries, right? Nanook of the North is a great example of, like, they were showing aspects of that native life and made it up. It's not true. And that's okay, but it's just you have to accept that there is a lot of half-truth, untruth, sometimes even flat-out lies. You know, Disney is very famous for that. What was it, the Wild World of Disney or whatever it is, with the lemmings, where they kind of allegedly, shall we say, corral them off the cliff and said they breed and commit suicide, which none of that is true. You know, what else is really interesting about this? We showed 3 films this month, all from Maryland. two of the films, Better Living Through Chemistry was a writer-director team that weren't siblings, which is it is very unusual for film. And the Blair Witch Project is another example of two guys that are not family in any way, given writer-director credits, right? I believe they even edited the film together. You're looking at Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. And the kernel idea of the Blair Witch Project goes back to 1993. They had just noticed that when you look at supernatural horror documentaries, a lot of times those are far more terrifying than any fiction, quote-unquote fiction, that the horror genre produced. And that sort of got them off and running. What I would like to say is that this was 93 they had this concept. The first official, real, found footage film, shall we say, was 1980's Cannibal Holocaust. My suspicion as to why there was such a gap. First of all, Cannibal Holocaust, it has a cult status. It's really popular amongst, huge horror fans. It's really... I really enjoyed the film. It's interesting, and it most certainly is kind of the OG found footage film, right? My suspicion as to why the genre didn't bloom further probably has to do with the fact that the filmmakers responsible for it almost went to prison because their government thought that they actually killed people to make it. And of course, they had to bring the actors in and prove like no, they're not dead, they're fine. But seeing somebody go through that probably turned a lot of people off from utilizing the same methodology. A year before the Blair Witch Project came out, there was another film called The Last Broadcast that used a lot of very similar techniques and ideas. It didn't do what the Blair Witch did. They sued the filmmakers behind the Blair Witch Project because they felt they'd ripped them off. And of course they lost that lawsuit and kind of looked like dicks. But the concept came in 93, right? And they developed a 35-page screenplay with plans of the dialogue being improvised. And the auditions that they had for casting, that was what determined the three they hired. Was, could they improvise? Could they make them believe they were scared? And they landed on Heather Donahue, Michael Williams, and Joshua Leonard. And that was the thing that kept striking us is, there's a couple moments that it's not the case, but for the most part, you do genuinely believe that they were scared, that it was legitimate horror. It didn't feel like acting, it felt realistic, and I think that's the appeal of the found footage genre when it's done right, is that it does feel authentic. And they shot the Blair Witch in Burgettsville in Maryland, the woods near there, in 8 days, which is really quick shoot. They ended up getting 20 hours out of that, and they had to edit it down to, 80 and change or whatever, 82 and change. What's really interesting, though, is that how they set it up. So they had, each day of the shoot, they had locations they had to get to that like it was more of a beat format. Like you're gonna go to this location and hit this thing. They would only find out like before they were filming, right? So they would know like they had catches, and this is before the days of everybody with an internet on their phone or whatever, and proper GPS systems that are portable like that. Really, I mean, for mass marketing situations like that wasn't a thing. So they would have maps and coordinates of where they would have to go. They would find these catches, and like it would have their directions for the day in terms of like what they need to accomplish, get done, fresh film and DV tape, and uh, you know their recording stuff, and they would leave what they had done the day prior at that location. And when they were gone, behind the scenes folks would swoop in, collect that material. Because there was rain, there was some weather stuff during the shoot that you see, and they just kind of had to roll with it, and they had to make sure that they didn't damage equipment and that they didn't damage anything captured, audio or video. So it was it sounds tough. It sounds like it would be a real challenge. It sounds like it's basically over a week of hiking in the middle of the woods. And this is part of the thing that I always question when I'm reading about these films, is that it's quoted as the original budget being $35,000 to $60,000. My honest guess is it was probably $30K, and it kind of ballooned here and there, and there's myth that builds out of this stuff, and memories become hazy. But on professional shoots, you have very specific budgets. I mean, there are some nefarious behind the scenes things that can happen with productions, but for the most part, you know what you're actually spending. And what it was bought, and with some of the post costs, it always ranges. They're saying at the very end of the day, it was a six-figure situation. But I don't know. I'm suspicious. Just, this is a very small indie film. Its costs swing wildly. Like, there's a spectrum. It's hard to tell. It's like trying to track down what was the budget for The Evil Dead. Well, who knows? And you think something like this, especially in '99, like, the expense of filming was dropping, and it's continued to drop. It's continued to get cheaper and cheaper. The thing that I really loved about within the film is that so it's so minimalist. There's brilliant little things you see, right? Like they go to the graveyard in the woods, and it's 7 piles of stones, and then the day they wake up, there are 3 piles of stones around their campsite, kind of representing like, well, they're gonna die. And it is a lot of really smart stuff. There are things like the discussion we had after the film. Somebody brought up like, you want the device of like, the map is gone, you've lost the map, but the goofball saying like he kicked it into the river because it wasn't being useful or whatever, seemed a bit much. Seemed a bit too too much like a bad horror convention, as opposed to it could have been used as something, as a better device or different device. I just kind of always thought like it would be much better if they held on to the map And they still ended up going in circles despite following the map and going in a singular direction via the compass. So I don't know. That's kind of been up for debate. That I've heard people defend it and say like, no, that's you can't have Heather be at fault for losing the map, and you can't. It adds a certain tension that is valuable. I don't know. I don't know. I think there are things they could have done better, and I think like the I don't know if you would call it exactly a remake or I don't know. The Blair, it was just called Blair Witch, not the sequel, The Book of Shadows. That's another situation. But I thought what they were trying to do with it was really interesting, and I think there were a lot of aspects of the storytelling they improved, and but it's not quite the OG, right? It's not quite what we watched. And the fact that it is so minimalist, and the fact that you don't see the monster, and it's all psychological to the viewer, right? It still works beautifully. It's still really interesting, but they give you nothing basically, and you make a molehill out of that, or you make a mountain out of that molehill, should I say? But when they were filming Blair Witch is they had like they had to mess with them, and they were trying to get as authentic of reactions as they could. So they had people out there in ghillie suits, and they had like people dressed like ninjas in the dark, and like they had all kind of weird stuff going on, and really kind of teed it up, and used loudspeakers to make some of this stuff, especially the audio. And that's another cool thing about the most important aspect of found footage, because it's the beauty of the genre is that when people watch found footage, they think, I could make that. And a lot of first timers do try to make found footage films. And most of them I don't think work at all, to be honest with you. There are exceptions, and there are even cases where when it works, it really works. The first Paranormal Activity film, I think, really, really works. But why does it really work? And I think the answer is the found footage film, the aesthetic. There are specifics to filming it and making it function, but a big key to that, maybe the biggest key, is the audio. What you choose to do with that audio is a make or break situation, and you could argue that with all film, of course, absolutely. But a film that really works, when I was in film school, there was this kind of regular thing we did where you would mute the film and watch it. They were hoping for the first time you were seeing this film, and then you would try to write an essay or a couple pages based on what you thought the film was, and that was strictly about images, because the idea is that it's motion picture, it's moving images, and films that are solely relying on audio to express their points and get the ideas across, the fluidity of the storytelling, and the storytelling itself should come from the images and how you juxtapose them and how you compose them. But with found footage, what you're saying is like, we found some shitty tapes about some shitty stuff that happened to people. Was the really infamous one, the August Underground. I think they made like what, three of those, I think, out of Pittsburgh, and those are really brutal found footage films. The second one particularly is rough, but because you're reverting that, because the aesthetic of this is really happening, documentary kind of psychology, how you use the audio to manipulate the audience. And the Blair Witch does a great job. The audio is so key because they show you, again, they show you nothing. It's the visual aspect is all reaction stuff. There were things in that film they didn't explain that I thought made work better, right? Like at the end they go into the house and you see all of those handprints on the wall, and they didn't explain what that represented of, all the children that had been murdered there and whatnot. None of that had been gotten into in terms of, they opened the film with those interviews, and the opening, like 10 minutes or whatever, 15 minutes, whatever it is, gives the entire context of the images you're going to be seeing in the future, like straight down the line to the very closing images. Michael, I think it was Michael standing in the corner when Heather gets downstairs, before she hits the ground. A group of people go out in the woods and scare the shit out of each other for 8 days, and they come back, and it takes them 8 months to cut the footage into a watchable film, which is a long time, 8 months. The post-production cost, again, it swelled wildly. But by January of '99, it premiered at the Sundance Film Festival at one of the coveted midnight screenings that a lot of horror films would kill for the chance to show at. And before it premiered there, they were walking the streets of Sundance and handing out these flyers declaring that the actors were missing or dead or whatever. And it did really, really well at Sundance. It did so well, in fact, that Artisan Entertainment picked it up and paid a nice $1.1 million for it. July it got its first limited release. It did really, really well. It expanded, was universally praised by critics, and kind of seen as this new methodology for horror. Cannibal Holocaust, critics were never going to love it, and your general audience was never going to love it. There were scenes that depicted graphic rape, and there was extremely brutal violence and disturbing images in it, and it did feel a bit like some type of exploitation of the native people. It is just a rough film. Again, I love the film, but it is rough for your general moviegoer. Where the Blair Witch, it is only rated R because of language. Like, it's a relatively safe film for your general audience, and it proved that. Because it went on and it grossed, I believe it was a little over $250 million worldwide. Wildly successful. It is one of the most successful independent films ever made. It's the 41st most profitable horror film ever made. It was so successful, in fact, that I think it was a year or so later, they made a sequel called Blair Witch 2: The Book of Shadows, which bombed. But it bombed because they learned nothing from the first one. Like, it's not even fucking related. to the original film. It doesn't even resemble it. It had a lot of issues, unfortunately. I like it. Not only did it spawn a sequel, but again, the prequel, remake, sequel, whatever the hell Blair Witch was, the one that came out a couple years ago. That one was much, much better. A thousandfold better than Book of Shadows, and I think really kind of elevated the franchise and the storytelling. But there have also been novels, comic books. There were four video games out right now. The original trilogy of them are not great. The most recent Blair Witch, that is it Bloober, I think was the name of the company that made it, was actually really fantastic. I really enjoyed that game. And it's gone on, and again, the technique of found footage is kind of elevated, so much so that the number one top grossing independent film ever is a found footage movie, Paranormal Activity. Thing made $1 billion. And then, you have somebody like J.J. Abrams that has been responsible for both Star Wars and Star Trek. He went and made Cloverfield, which is a found footage quasi-Godzilla type thing. It most certainly has justified all the praise that it's gotten, and we were watching it. It kind of surprised me how well it really held up, and maybe what we expect out of horror, shall we say, because we've experienced so much in the genre that we need more to get scared now, maybe, but everything that the Blair Witch Project did really, it still holds up. It's still a great watch. There are moments that we laughed, and it still led to fantastic discussions and techniques. There's been a lot of, again, there's the idea of like anybody can make found footage films. Time has continued to prove that's not the case, and we have a couple that are really great that are made by spectacular filmmakers, but there are some unintended things, right? Like, I think the Blair Witch has a lot to do with reality television becoming what it is, because reality television really started popping. There were precursors to it, right? The Real World on MTV, or Road World, whatever the early MTV ones were, and that stuff was kind of in the works, but this kind of pushed it further and elevated it more, and also the proliferation of ghost hunting shows, right? That pushed this further. So much so that you look at, it was another found footage film called Grave Encounters. I think there were 2 of them, or maybe 3. But the first one was interesting because it worked in terms of, it took the found footage ghost hunting type of thing and cranked it up to 11. And it's not just a poltergeist, it's a poltergeist on steroids, right? So, it really, and then you look at something minimalist like, what is it called? Skinamarink is a newer one. Told from the perspective of a little boy. It's a lot in the dark. Yeah, there's the Australian horror film like Mongo that had moments that really, really worked. The girl passing her dead self or whatever. But anyway, now that we are done with Maryland month, we are heading into June. And our first June screening is on the 5th at 6 p.m. Hotel Gunter's Speakeasy. We're going to be screening, Well, first of all, the theme is summer scares. So this is stuff that like it's not relying on fall or winter. It's not relying on night. These are movies set in the summer, and a lot of the scares are shot, if not all of the scares are done in the daylight, which is another interesting twist on the horror genre. The first film that we are showing, again June 5th, 6 p.m., is Midsommar, the Ari Aster masterpiece. Really, I've seen the film a ton of times. Just I can't get enough of it. It's so good. They really, this whole art house horror, high horror, elevated horror type of thing. I don't see it that way, and I'm sure when we screen it here on the 5th, which is actually the day that this podcast also goes up. I don't see this what people are saying as a new thing. I don't see it as new. I don't see it as elevated horror or anything. I look at it and I think like it has a very distinct European horror feel to it. It's constructed, a lot of these are constructed better than your low budget stuff, of course, or your popcorn schlock stuff, of course. But I love horror as a genre, very much so. And I'm glad to see this stuff getting attention, and I'm glad to see it exciting people and turning them on and getting them revved up. I'm even glad to see people that kind of poo-poo the genre accepting that these are great works. Midsommar, maybe it is one of the very best of these. I'm not sure if I think more highly of this or Hereditary or I don't know. I think this is. I think Hereditary is much more horrendous to people with families. People that are in their 40s, 50s, where I think Midsommar is far more horrific to college age people, just based on the psychology they're playing with. But it works so well. And the thing that I love about this, and in fact, the thing that I've loved about a lot of European, or not even necessarily European, but foreign horror, especially when you're looking at like the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, that stuff. Or you go and you look at the old giallo films or whatever. A lot of times, the very best of them, they'll pick one, two, maybe three really strong, powerful images, and that's what drives the disturbing element, or those couple of things. And those images elevate the film's intensities. And it's just a couple moments. Everything else is build, everything else is story, everything is character. But they pick their spots, and it's not necessarily. In fact, it's rarely the final image that really does it. Sometimes it's the I've seen them start films with images like that, or almost halfway through or at the end of the first act, bam, there's this image. But those images become ingrained in you, and they become a part of your DNA, and they last for a lifetime. There are tons of these that I can think of. Midsommar operates very much on this way, that there are three, there are like two or three really strong images that really kind of ingrain themselves in your mind, almost like they leave a scar or something. They're wonderful. And it is a very beautiful film. It has horrific moments, but it's gorgeous. And I hope that you all will come and join us. A bit of housekeeping before we go. First, sorry if I sound so shitty. Another sinus infection, so, dealing with that again. The weather has been very inconsistent here in Frostburg. But I would very much like to thank everybody that came to the Blair Witch screening and everybody that comes to these screenings. It's been a really great time, and the conversations have been incredible. And it's honestly, the conversations are my favorite part of this, besides showing really cool movies that I think deserve a good look. I'd like to thank the Carter family and the staff here at the Hotel Gunter. They've been continue to be supportive. Been really great. Even though the business was closed when we screened Blair Witch, they very much were very inviting and encouraged me to continue the screening anyway, which is that was a very wonderful sentiment, and it's nice to be trusted that way, to ensure that nobody's going to come in the building and go crazy or whatever. So I really, really appreciated that. Everybody here has been really great with this, and huge thanks to the Maryland State Arts Council, not just for the funding, but been super supportive and just kind of really. It's an organization that really backs their artists. It's a very rare thing for a state to take care of their creative community. Most states don't. Most states don't care. And Maryland is an exception. And MSAC is wonderful. And anybody that wants to do anything creative, I encourage you to check them out if you live in the state of Maryland. Because they are the reason that so many creative endeavors happen here in Maryland. So, again, June 5th, 6 o'clock, Hotel Gunter Speakeasy, Midsommar.